I'm at Plugged, a cultural institution and event space in the heart of Cork City that also trades in coffee and vinyl records. I'm here to meet Brian O'Connor from Brian's Wines, a specialist in natural, low-intervention wine. Not only does Brian import a selection of unique bottles into Ireland for restaurants and for general sale, he actually travels to where these wines come from, forming strong connections with the growers and makers who are taking the craft back to its fundamental level. Brian, how's it going, man?
James, good to see you back in Cork again.
Yeah, thanks.
I didn't think you'd be back so quickly.
I know, yeah. I love Cork, so especially there's a very vibrant food and drink scene here. Restaurants, chefs. Your progression from, I think you were telling me, you used to work at farmers markets when you were very young. It was a progression from food to hospitality and then into wine and into natural wine. Was that inspired by the amazing produce and the food scene here in Cork?
100%. Yeah, Cork's always been, I suppose, from my perspective, been quite steeped in food tradition and in culinary culture. Like you said, I grew up working in farmers markets from quite a young age. From my early teens, I really looked up to a lot of the growers, the people who were making cheese, the bread makers. I was working in hospitality all my life. Then from there, I really enjoyed it. I grew up in hospitality at home as well, and it was something that I just gravitated towards, and actually my personality and what I loved doing. I became interested in wine, and I suppose had ambitions to maybe eventually open a place myself. So I began kind of academic studies in wine, I suppose, and very quickly as I went down that road, I discovered that my kind of assumptions about wine, which were kind of echoed similar kind of production methods to the cheesemakers and the bread makers that I'd grown up admiring, it didn't necessarily map over quite the same way.
You mean that wine as a product has this reputation of being of fine quality, but when you learned more about it, you discovered that the process wasn't how you envisioned it?
I would say even how most people who think about wine think about it. The artisanal kind of methods that you see in, let's say, a dairy here where someone's making farmhouse cheese, everything is reduced to, we talk about a lot in cooking, gestures, in the kitchen gestures and the gestures of the chef. I'd imagine it was the same with wine, and really it's not. So for most wine that we drink, most wine on the shelves here, those wines would be of a certain medium or a genre, let's say. We can consider the mainstream, and all those wines really would be made with an end goal in mind. So what ends up in the bottle, what ends up in our glass, really has a very tenuous relationship with the fruit that's been harvested. And what I mean when I say that is, so if you want to create a wine that has, a high alcohol profile with lots of a particular tannin profile, a particular acid profile, no matter what your raw materials that you bring from the vineyard are, there are ways that you can manipulate that using additives, using surgical kind of equipment, and I suppose in a way it's a triumph of consistency, it's a triumph of control, because advancements in technology have allowed us to do that. These wines have a slightly different intention. The people who make them have a slightly different intention. Their focus really would be on the vineyard itself. They're trying to focus on making wine in which the raw materials come entirely from the vineyard. You're not adding anything afterwards, and that's, I suppose, would be a general definition for what people know as natural wines. Yeah, so you're focusing on the raw materials, the fruit, and everything that comes with it. So the naturally occurring yeasts and the rest of it. Once you bring that fruit to the cellar, then there's nothing else added. Only time, some technique, and what you're looking for then is, I suppose, the intention of those wines, rather than being consistent and being controlled and fitting a certain formula. These wines don't really conform to a recipe. They're more expressive of a time, a place, and a process as well.
Brian has brought a selection of natural wines for us to try, each one being indicative of a distinct style while showcasing a range of unique characteristics.
Going back to the kind of regionality of food and the regionality of wine, this is from very close to Venice, so a bit further north of Venice, where Prosecco comes from, the Conegliano, and it's by a winery called Costadilla. Going back to what we were speaking about earlier, as the wine became industrialized, this particular style and the sediment itself would be a stylistic characteristic of this wine called Fondo Prosecco was going pretty much extinct. So when Ernesto Cattell, the guy who started this winery, started bringing back these wines, people initially had, people had their qualms about seeing the sediment in the wine. But really, what it does is it helps to give the wine texture. It gives it a little bit of flavour as well, that kind of biscuity, bloomy flavour. And it also, in certain ways, helps to preserve the wine as it's aging in the bottle, because, as we said earlier, there's no additives in these wines other than the fruit itself. The col fondo means with the bottom, or with the sediment at the bottom of the bottle, so that's intentionally not discouraged. Oftentimes, if you're making a sparkling wine like this, you'll rest the bottle on its head, let all the sediment settle here, and then pop it out, and the pressure of the bottle will get the sediment out. In this case, they want to keep it, and that's why we're seeing it at the bottom of the bottle, and kind of floating through the bottle really today. Usually a wine from this part of Italy would be made with a grape called Glera, or I suppose Glera is probably the star of a whole band of grapes that traditionally would have been used in making Prosecco. But this, so I don't know if you noticed that the kind of flavour or the taste, the aroma of the wine, there's a lot of kind of orange blossom, like ginger and biscuit,
lemon as well.
lemon.
It's very clean.
Really nice minerality to it as well. But that's a blend. This wine is a blend of Moscato and Glera. So a nice kind of sparkling to wake us up on a Sunday afternoon.
What you've touched on there about grape varieties, now with climate change, big wine producing countries, they're struggling with the heat and the seasons are unpredictable, and there's a lot of old varieties that would have been used a long time ago. They're now coming back because they're hardier, isn't that correct?
Some of them are, yeah, and some of them are. Or what we're seeing as well a lot in places like the south of France now, they're starting to plant grapes from the south of Italy, or a little bit, from grapes from Sicily as well, because they're a little bit more used to that type of heat. The lack of rain as well, or rain coming at wrong times of the year, or so it's, the challenges are definitely there, and they're definitely real. Chatting about the changes in the climate, and this is actually a particularly pertinent wine to drink when we're having that discussion. So this is Carignan Blanc. So it's normally when you think of Carignan, I suppose we think of a red grape, but this is a white, I suppose, version of the grape, and there's only a very small amount of it planted in the world. But the guy who makes the wine, Ferran, I actually met him. Bodega Clandestina is his bodega. This was from his fourth vintage, excuse me. And he actually planted this variety when he started out because the grape that he loves to work with, and the grape that's from the part of Catalonia where he works, the Penedès, is Xarel·lo, and that's a really interesting grape, but he thinks in maybe 10 years they're not going to be able to grow it there anymore because it's so hot that it just loses all the acidity by the time it gets ripe. And instead he planted this Carignan Blanc. So these are young vines, but Carignan Blanc is much more heat resistant, and it means that it can stay on the vine much later in the ripening season, keep the acidity, which you kind of feel in this wine, and get the phenolic ripeness as well, which is really important for I suppose, good maturation and the wine to present well once it's finished.
It's interesting that when we talk about natural wine, like we mentioned, people label it as can be a bit funky or it can be quite divisive. Like for me, this wine tastes very, very clean on the palate. Like there's no hint of any funk as it's labelled. There's a wide spectrum when it comes to natural wine.
Exactly, there's a wide spectrum, and I think Ferran, who makes this wine, he's a young winemaker. He's from Catalonia, which is a place that has a very proud cultural identity, and he takes representing Penedès, the place that he comes from, very seriously. So he's very precise about his winemaking, and I suppose it's kind of a new generation of, I suppose, natural winemakers are now, I suppose, making wines that present as a really, really good wine, but still have all the energy and all the digestibility and all the qualities that people love about natural wine. So it's a broad church. Even natural wine's a broad church.
The synergy that exists between wine and food is remarkably exciting and dates back centuries. To better understand this, I've brought a selection of things to try. Local oysters, dark chocolate, Irish farmhouse cheese, and summer strawberries. Brian pours a bottle by Nacho Gonzalez from La Perdita in Valdeorras in Galicia.
So this is a clarete, so it's a rosé essentially, a dark rosé, but it's a blend of red and white grapes. So mainly Palomino, which is a grape we normally see in Jerez. Normally it's used in the production of sherry. This was planted in Galicia in the 1940s, and there's about 5% of a grape called Garnacha Tintorera as well, which is a dark, red-fleshed grape variety. So it's like you were saying, we're going to be talking about pairing wines. We're going to be talking about pairing wine with food outside the kind of prosaic realm of haute cuisine. For me, what's really important, and they're the wines I brought along today, is kind of the seasonality. So when the weather's hot, when the weather is a little bit sticky like it is today, you want something fresh and crisp that's gonna satisfy you and refresh you.
Like it smells fresh and crisp, but juicy,
quite juicy as
red
well.
Fruits kind of coming through for me.
Big time, and nice and generous, very refreshing, and good with food. When you're pairing wine with food, I suppose what's important to consider is all the structural components of the wine: the tannins, the acid, the alcohol.
If a wine is tannic, what does that mean?
So tannins come from the skin of the grape, and you can have them in orange wine, you can have them in red wine, because when you're making an orange or a red wine, the juice soaks on the skins and draws out the tannins. So the tannins are essentially, you see them in tea as well. If you've an oversteeped cup of tea and you take a sip of black tea, you feel that bitter,
it dries the mouth.
Exactly. So what's happening there is the tannins are binding to the proteins in your mouth and drying it out.
If you're drinking wine on its own, it can have a tannic and an acidic profile, but if you're pairing it with food, that can change completely.
Exactly. So where the tannins bind to the proteins on the inside of your mouth, if you're drinking wine on its own, if you're eating something like a piece of coulis, or if you're eating an oyster.
Well, let's try some over.
Please, I'll let you do the honors with it.
So this is coulis mature. This is probably, no, it is my favourite cheese in Ireland, if not the world. Made here in Cork, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
This coulis has a very nutty aftertaste.
Yeah, there's a richness, there's a sweetness, and the tannins will help make that nice and silky.
There's an idea in wine pairing that you can choose things that are complementary, and you can choose things that actually amplify or lower the profile of what you're eating. Can you tell me a little bit about that, because I find that really interesting?
Yeah. So let's say where we can see the tannins here in this wine are working quite nicely with the cheese and kind of giving it that really kind of like buttery and silky feeling in your mouth. When it comes to something like dark chocolate, where there's a lot of oxalic acid, bitterness.
I'll try it actually.
Having that tannins with bitterness and bitterness, that can lead to some clashes. So something like a green salad now, usually you want a lighter, crisp kind of white wine to eat with that, because there's going to be less tannin, there's going to be less of that kind of clash of bitterness. But again, look, I think for me anyway, when you're looking into doing like a really kind of academic pairing, those things are useful, but really it's hard to go too far wrong when you're pairing. You know, when you have really good food, really good wine, the ingredients are all good, the ingredients are there, and yeah, I mean, if it enhances the enjoyment of the meal, that's the important thing.
We spoke a bit earlier about all the incredible local produce in Cork. You kindly picked up these oysters, massive oysters actually. You told me that you asked for medium ones, and this is what you got.
That's it.
Where are these from?
So these are from Rossmore Oysters. So Rupert, who runs this oyster farm, runs a few farmers markets in Cork as well. And they grow these oysters, and they grow native oysters as well, which unfortunately I couldn't get today. But these are delicious too. And
these are rock oysters. Yeah.
They're rock oysters, and I brought along this wine in particular to pair with them. This is a white wine, but there's a little bit of skin contact, so you have a little bit of tannin, and with the protein of the oysters, that works quite well. This is also a wine with a little bit of a kind of mineral verve to it, a mineral edge, a little bit of saltiness, and again that matches up nicely with the kind of with the flavors of the sea that you get
Okay.
with an oyster. This is from a guy called Jordi Lorenz, who's up in the mountains in Catalonia again. So we're back to Catalonia there. I suppose a lot of the wines from there are wines that answer nicely to the heat of summer. We've picked a wine here that is, I suppose, technically an orange wine. It's a wine made from white grapes that is left in contact with the skins, so you get a little bit of a tannic profile.
The size of these oysters, I don't know how I'm gonna
Get it down.
Are you a chewer, or do you just like
Down the hatch for me. Although,
Alright, there's one for you. I've done.
think in that case I'm mature.
I think you have
Just
to be
too big.
mature with the size of this thing.
They're good though. That's butter.
Have to chew it. They're not very salty though. They're kind of
Yeah, really
mild.
kind of sweet actually, and buttery. Yeah. What did he say about them? Yeah, I suppose they have a real sweetness to them. Those oysters.
But after drinking that at the end, it like lifts the whole thing.
Really nice.
It is like adding lemon at the end.
It's almost like a squeeze of seawater and lemon. Yeah, it really is.
But again, there's like so much fun in that because when you even oysters in Ireland, what we can get here, so diverse. The texture, the flavor, the salinity, and then you have the wine. So like the pairings you can do are just incredible.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of options for sure. I mean, we could have drank any of these wines with the oysters, and it would have worked. But for me, this one in particular is a nice match.
You supply a lot of high-end restaurants around Ireland now with wine, so they look to you for your expertise when it comes to pairing with food, right?
In a restaurant where they care so deeply about the provenance of the ingredients that come into the kitchen, how they're treated, and how they're presented, it's, I suppose, a natural to extend that to the wine. I always try and keep in mind that it's like to kind of match the kind of culinary ambition of the kind of amazing work we see coming out of kitchens in Ireland at the moment. My preference, the food that I like the most, is just simple food like we just had at the table here. But of course, when you're looking at the higher end and the really kind of the restaurants where there's a whole lot of work gone into the presentation of the food, wines like this work really well as well. This is a white wine, and it's put in a can, which can be quite, I suppose, for people.
Would they look at it and think it's not as good quality because it's in a can?
Exactly. But
And that's not the case.
It's, in my opinion, it's not the case. So this wine was originally intended for bottle, but because of bottle shortages after the pandemic and with the war in Ukraine, an alternative was necessary. So Jordy, who makes the wine that we drank there with the oysters, is always experimenting, and he did a few experimentations with wine in a can. So it answers to a couple of challenges that are facing the wine industry at the moment. One of them is that the weight of bottles as you're shipping wine is not ideal. They're single use essentially. And as well as that, there's a lot of airspace in the boxes when they're being sent, so it's not necessarily the most economical way. With the cans, first of all, they're tightly packed in slabs of 24, so there's very little airspace. They're very light. The cans are infinitely recyclable. And as well as that, the paper is made from a calcium carbonate kind of stone. It's a stone-based paper, so there's no trees that need to be cut down. There's no pulp required to make these labels. So I suppose when we talk about sustainability in wine, this is a really good option. So similar, it's the same grapes that go into the wine that we just had, and it's actually from the same producer,
Okay.
same seller.
And when you poured that kind of just a bit of natural fizz there.
Yeah, a little bit of, I suppose, being locked in the can. There's a little bit of CO2 trapped in the wine from the winemaking process, and again, that's kind of almost intentional. It gives it a really fresh, juicy profile. If you're drinking a wine like this, you don't want to be. It's nothing too cerebral, nothing too ponderous. This is just a wine to please.
What is orange wine? Because it's a bit confusing for people.
Yeah, well, even the wine we're drinking here would be considered technically to be an orange wine. So an orange wine is made from grapes, but it is made, instead of being like a white wine where the juice is pressed straight off the skins and the pulp. For an orange wine, you leave the juice in contact with the skins, and what you're drawing out there is some colour. You can kind of see it in the glass here as well. Some tannins, which, as we spoke about earlier, are always in the skins of the grape and in the seeds as well.
And the colour comes from the skin, not from the
comes
juice.
from the skin, not from the juice. Exactly, that's an important one to say. So an orange wine essentially is, I suppose, a simple way of describing it would be using white grapes, but making it like a red wine. Skin contact wine, orange wine, they're interchangeable terms. And this was a technique that's as old as wine itself. This isn't something that just came about. I suppose, again, it's like what we talked about earlier with natural wine. This has been rediscovered, and the kind of pleasures of orange wine, especially in a gastronomic sense when you're having food, are, you know, they're there. We just experience them, so we know what they are. But yeah, I guess it gives you it gives you a little bit of texture, and a little bit more flavour and oomph.
Have you seen a growing demand for this?
I've definitely seen a growing interest. What we're seeing now, I suppose, is a lot of the public are actually going to restaurants and going to shops and demanding or asking about natural wines, rather than it being from the industry itself. There are people coming and asking for these wines.
There's an interest that just seems to be organically growing.
Exactly. And again, it kind of reflects, like we were saying about the coffee, about the bread. People just are looking for something with a little bit more, maybe authenticity seems like a kind of, maybe not the right word, but looking for something that they can connect with. And that's what, for me anyway, those wines provide.
And the last thing I want to ask you is, what advice would you give to people who haven't tried natural wine, haven't gotten into it, or have maybe an idea of it that isn't accurate? What would you say?
Yeah, go out and try, and don't be afraid to make a mistake. If you're abroad and you're looking for a place to go and eat, don't be afraid to get it wrong and have one that doesn't work out. That's always going to be the case anyway.
And follow the locals, what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking time out today to share your knowledge with me, and I hope to see you again soon.
James, thanks a million. It was great to see you, and I hope we just get to finish the rest of these bottles this afternoon.
Me too, man.
This man's never seen an oyster in his life. He's a big fraud.